What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, May 9th, 2016, start of a brand new week. We've got a lot of stuff to be talking about today. Our phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. Dan is in our control room for at least a few more minutes, then Mike will be taking over, so be nice to whoever answers the phone when you call on in to get on the air. All righty, getting right into the news here. First of all, on the corporate media, they're talking about this Department of Justice lawsuit against North Carolina over their bathroom law like it's the end of the world. No, it's a distraction. They're running this nonsense because there's other things they don't want to have to talk about, which, of course, is why you're over here at Republic Broadcasting. So what's going on here that they don't want you looking at is over in the campaigns, Hillary is now declaring that Republicans will support her campaign for presidency because Donald Trump just can't possibly be a good president. Forgetting, of course, that Donald Trump has won the GOP nomination. Now, there are Republican leaders among the neocons and the warhawks who have openly proclaimed that they would rather support Hillary than see Trump in the White House, and they're probably marching along behind Hillary, picking up crumbs and whatnot. But they're pretty much alone because the rank-and-file GOP continues to support Donald Trump. And part of it is the fact that Trump's an outsider. The other part of it is the rank-and-file voters of both parties are seriously angry over the way the party machinery was trying to hijack the process. It's one thing to steer a nomination in the shadows, and quite another when the light of day is on it and everybody sees what you're doing. Now, a lot of people are very concerned, curious, angry over the fact that NBC had the story about Hillary's private email server being hacked into by the hacker Guccifer, and that while he was in there, he spotted at least 10 other foreign IP addresses logged in, prowling around. Now, that's a major, major story because it does show everything that was on Hillary's server, including all the classified documents, were exposed to foreign intelligence services. That's a Title 18 violation right there. NBC sat on the story until Fox News broke it. Then they came out and said, oh yeah, we've got this one too. And so over at Op-Ed News, they tried to approach NBC and say, would you give us a reason why you had this major story? You could have had a world exclusive on it, and then you sit on it for a month, and you get scooped by Fox News. And NBC, not surprisingly, has not replied. NBC apparently stands for Never Bash Clinton. Now, there's another article coming out of Alternet. Will the Democratic establishment continue to defy its base's growing support for Palestinian human rights? And they're pointing out the obvious dichotomy that's opening up between the presumptive Democratic nominee, Hillary Clinton, who is out there talking about her unspeakable bond, or unbreakable bond with Netanyahu and Israel, and that how, as president, she's going to crack down on campus campaigners for Palestinian human rights. That First Amendment just can go to heck as far as I'm concerned. When Israel's involved, there is no freedom of speech in the United States of America, according to Hillary here. But current polls are showing that the rank-and-file Democratic Party are moving to the center on this issue. And young people and self-identified progressives are showing increasing solidarity with the Palestinians, who, as I speak, are being bombed by Israel again for no apparent reason. Now then, let's get back over to that charitable foundation of the Clintons, because this is really starting to unravel. And again, the hypothesis I'm working on is that Hillary Clinton has repeated the 1996 Chinagate scandal. This is where President Bill Clinton authorized the transfer of sensitive technology with military applications to companies in China. And at the same time, Chinese money poured into his re-election campaign through Chinese-American citizen cutouts. But when this was all being investigated, Chinagate, it came out the money was coming from China, including Chinese intelligence. He should have been impeached at that point, but he wasn't. So now we're moving into the present. And what a sweet little setup Hillary had at the State Department. She's got a private email server with weaker security than Ashley Madison. She's got all of our nation's top secrets on it. It's outside government control and monitoring and security. What a great way to deliver secrets to customers. And then she's got her charitable foundation to collect and launder the payments. Oh, no, I'm not being paid for revealing military secrets to other countries. Oh, no, these other nations, they just gave us money for our charitable work. It's a beautiful system. She doesn't have to run on out and put chalk marks on mailboxes or actually physically steal files or stick packages underneath bridges. It's a wonderful little system. So getting back over to the Clinton Foundation, 4 of the Clinton Foundation trustees have already been either charged or convicted of financial crimes, including bribery and fraud. These are the trustees, the top people. Now, we're seeing another one of these articles trying to reassure us that, yes, the FBI is going to make a move against Hillary Clinton. I'm not holding my breath anytime soon. This one is from PoliticalInsider.com and basically saying that the FBI will announce that they're about to interview Hillary Clinton. They've already interviewed all of her subordinates. They're putting their story together. But I have absolutely no confidence that the FBI is going to actually do their job. Because if Hillary becomes president, she will take her revenge on the FBI leadership. And the FBI have been the protectors of the Clintons going all the way back to the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster, and Hillary can blackmail the FBI with that to force their cooperation in more cover-ups. Now, we're already seeing a propaganda campaign coming on out that regardless of what Hillary may have done, she didn't intend to do wrong, therefore she's innocent. They're going to claim that everything that happened was a mistake. It was just a mistake. Really, nothing bad was intended. Now, this argument breaks down almost immediately. Nobody intends to run a red light and kill a pedestrian. But when you do, you probably go to jail. In any event, Title 18 does include exposure of state secrets through accident and negligence as prosecutable crimes. And we have Hillary's June 17, 2011 email to Jacob Sullivan ordering him to strip the classification headers off of a document and send it to her via non-secure means. It doesn't matter what was in the document. It doesn't even matter if Jacob did it or not. The giving of that order is the violation of Title 18, Section 793. And Hillary's issuing that order means she did know. Back in 2011, she was in possession of classified documents at a time when the only email server she was using was her own private server, which, by the way, violated an executive order signed by her husband. I'd like to remind everybody that Title 18 also includes a provision that anyone who violates any section of Title 18 is automatically prohibited from holding public office. That's what's on the line here. Now, as you know, Paul Ryan came out end of last week and said, I am not going to support Donald Trump. Just going to throw a little bit of a snit fit. And it's significant because Paul Ryan is not only Speaker of the House, he's the chairman of the GOP convention this year. And so a lot of people were looking at him and saying, okay, now you're Speaker of the House of Representatives. Are you not supposed to represent the will of the people? And the people very clearly are favoring Donald Trump over pretty much anybody else. So Paul Ryan is facing re-election this November, and his challenger, Paul Nellon, has come on out saying, Ryan is betraying us all. He's turning his back on the popular nominee, Donald Trump. He was out there giving speeches, say that he's all for a secure border. Then he turns around and funds every dangerous immigration policy in the $1.8 trillion omnibus spending bill. Now, I'm going to have to take back some of the bad things I've said about Sarah Palin over the years because I guess she's been studying up. All of a sudden, she sounds like she knows what she's talking about. Sarah Palin has endorsed Paul Ryan's challenger, Paul Nellon, and saying simply, Ryan's political career is over for disrespecting the will of the people, and that is going to be a growing trend. If you don't represent the will of the people, you are going to get a pink slip. Whether it's Paul Ryan, the GOP leadership, the Democratic leadership, all of these people who presume that the voters should not be consulted will select the leaders for you and all will be well. If Sarah Palin had been talking like this back when she was with McCain, McCain would have done a heck of a lot better. Now, apparently there is so much pressure going on. Paul Ryan is now saying that if Donald Trump insists that he, Paul Ryan, will step down as chair of this year's GOP National Convention, I think it would be a really good idea because we already know the political machine is trying to find some way to throw this into a contested convention, to find some way to prevent Donald Trump from winning that first ballot nomination. Because if they can do that, then the GOP leadership can throw Trump out and put whoever else they want in place. Now, apparently Mitt Romney is going on over and saying he's going to mount a third-party campaign to take votes away from Donald Trump in the general election. Now we're hearing CNN is actually endorsing the Libertarian Party candidate, Gary Johnson, as the alternative to Trump. Notice they didn't say alternative to Hillary or alternative to the establishment. They're pitting the Libertarians against Trump, again trying to siphon more votes away from him this November. Have you ever seen a more corrupt, crooked, and manipulated election in your lifetime? I haven't, and I'm getting to be an old guy. By the way, speaking of OLD, for those of you who follow her, today is the Lady Claire's birthday, and no, you don't need to know how old she is right now. But I'm taking her to dinner tonight. Article coming out of ericmargolis.com. U.S. Republicans fear the Donald. And they're talking about how all these leaders of the GOP party who thought they could pick the candidates from among those pre-approved by AIPAC and Wall Street and the military-industrial complex and the pharmaceutical-industrial complex are wringing their hands. Their control over the minds of the Republican voters is slipping. And they're in a panic. Now, of course, it's not just the Republicans. War hawks of all parties are very concerned that Donald Trump is going to slam the brakes on all of these interventions around the world. It's going to be less money for the military-industrial complex, less money for the Defense Department, less money for Israel, horror of all horrors. Now, this article, Eric Margolis wrote, ends with saying, yeah, what the GOP is trying to do to Trump could destroy the GOP party. And Eric says that's a good thing. It's time to blow the existing Republican Party to little tiny pieces and build a new party that represents America's 99%, not the gilded 1%. That would be a consummation devoutly to be wished. And I already have a name for the movement, the Paleocons. Standing opposition to the neocons, we need to go back to Paleocons, who go back to traditional conservative values on which this nation was built. Now, Glenn Beck is out there just apparently in a panic. He had been out there predicting Ted Cruz was going to win the GOP nomination, which we knew was an impossibility because Ted Cruz does not meet the constitutional eligibility requirements. It was proved several times over, and the GOP leadership was saying, those voters, they don't care about the Constitution, and they learned a very hard lesson about that one. But Glenn Beck is out there saying Ted Cruz should restart his campaign. He should get back in there because Ted Cruz has to win the White House because Glenn Beck said he would, and Glenn Beck can't be wrong, so Ted Cruz should get on back in there. Now, I have absolutely no doubt that Ted Cruz is probably looking at being a player if the GOP convention goes to a brokered convention. He just doesn't need to waste any more money in these primary battles. In fact, the more primaries he goes up against Trump in and the more he loses, the less viable as a substitute nominee he becomes. So I think Cruz is laying low. But there is that issue behind that. Ted Cruz was born not in the United States. He was born in Canada of parents who were Canadian citizens. He does not meet the natural born requirement in the Constitution. And the GOP may ignore it, try and make it go away, and the corporate media may ignore it, try and make it go away. But I guarantee you, if Ted Cruz replaces Donald Trump as the nominee, Hillary Clinton's lawyers are going to go right to the United States Supreme Court and get him kicked out, and we will be heading into November with just one candidate for President of the United States. Just like they used to do in the old Soviet Union. Isn't that cool? All right, turning to the war zones. There's an article over in Global Research up in Canada. The U.S. is working to block the Syrian liberation of Aleppo by supporting Al-Qaeda's Nusra Front. Remember the good old days when we all thought Al-Qaeda and ISIS were our enemies and Al-Nusra were the bad guys? And now that Syria is about ready to take back complete control of Syria, we find out the U.S. was actually sponsoring, training, and supporting these so-called moderate rebels and terrorist groups as proxies. And we have the documents declassified from the Judicial Watch lawsuit that confirm Al-Qaeda and ISIS work covertly for the United States government. So now, as the Syrian army closes in on Aleppo, the U.S. is trying to get more supplies and weapons to the Nusra Front to try and block them off and stall this, because once Syria gets all the terrorists and rebels out of Syria, the U.S. loses any justification for going back in. And they're trying to basically get this Syrian, what they call it a civil war. It isn't. It's a covert attempt at an invasion and overthrow. They're trying to stall it so they can say, all right, well, then we need to go back in and help the various sides. Now, as you know, John Kerry has issued an ultimatum to Bashar al-Assad to transfer power over to these terrorist groups by August, or the U.S. will change tactics, implying either invasion or a decapitation strike at Assad himself. In other words, the U.S. government is favoring turning Syria over to these terrorist groups. Now, have you noticed every single country where the United States has had a successful intervention over the last decade has turned into an absolute mess? Because out of chaos comes profits. If you've got the people fighting against each other, then they're not paying attention when American corporations are looting them. But this is basically what's going on with Kerry's ultimatum. He wants to recreate Syria as the Libya of the Levant. It's a complete mess. Now, Turkey has bombed a Kurdish city using banned phosphorus munitions. It is now becoming obvious that all the claims that Bashar al-Assad was using sarin gas and chlorine gas and all the rest of it are nonsense. The trails keep leading back to Turkey and back to the United States of America. Now, white phosphorus is favored as a weapon because it is banned internationally. But there's one exception. It can be used to generate a smoke screen to cover a retreating army. So when Turkey bombs the Kurdish city, or when Israel drops white phosphorus on the Gazans and it sets schools and everything on fire, Israel and Turkey just say, well, we were just laying smoke to cover our retreat. It's one of those gray areas behind which atrocities often hide. Now, over in Baghdad, following Muqtada al-Sadr's little demonstration, peaceful demonstration, a week ago, but still a demonstration of power. They got into the green zone, took over the parliament building, made their point, and left. Baghdad is now on full military lockdown because of that. They're afraid, and I think that's the message al-Sadr wanted to send. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, getting on back to the various war zones, as it were. Very interesting observation coming out of Sputnik News. Middle East leaders are starting to turn away from Obama and turn towards Putin, according to a U.S. diplomat, Dennis Ross. Now, Dennis is out there saying the reason for this is because Obama has not been decisive enough in dealing militarily with threats to the various commercial interests in the region. I think it's a lot more fundamental. Russia, and for that matter China, are going around the world making deals. All the U.S. does is make war, because we don't really make or grow anything anymore that the rest of the world wants to buy. That's why this arm twisting is going on with the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership and the Trans-Pacific Partnership to set into law. You will buy so much of our products. We don't care if you put them into the landfill, but you will buy them. It's basically a global form of mercantilism, where the rulers tell the people not only what they must buy, but who they must buy it from. This was a hideous abuse done by King George III to the American colonists. They were not allowed to shop for the best deal. They would get their tea from the British East India Company. They would buy their cloth from the knitting mills in Manchester and Leeds. And it was enforced dependency on a line of products. And because it was a monopoly, the profits were really, really good. And that was a big part of what led to the revolution, along with King George's Currency Act, which forced the colonies to stop using interest-free money and conduct all business using banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England. Those were the two real causes of the American Revolution. I know in public school they teach you about tea parties and things like that, because they don't want you to realize we've actually sunk back down to the same forms of covert enslavement the American colonists were facing when they wrote that Declaration of Independence. We're there. So, the more the U.S. screams and demands and whines and cries, the more the world turns away from it. Now, down in Israel, their defense ministry is planning yet another new illegal settlement in the northern West Bank. And this is coming out in the area called Amona. And you need to understand, under international law, these settlements are illegal, because Israel is occupying these lands. And there are rules for military occupation of other people's lands, which Israel has habitually been refusing. But Israel has come up with a new way to get around that. And what they're doing is they're starting to declare that the West Bank, and for that matter the Golan Heights, are not occupied territories, they're liberated lands, therefore not subject to the rules of international law. Israel has liberated these lands from their rightful owners, and that gives them the right to go on in and basically do whatever they want. And as a matter of fact, there is a story over in Press TV that Israel is in fact about to announce that it is going to simply annex the West Bank. Because it's not occupied territory, it's liberated land, we liberated it, therefore we're going to just take it over. And it should remind us all that Israel holds the world's record for defiance of United Nations resolutions regarding their behavior. Israel is bombing Gaza for the third straight day. And Israel's trying to claim that Hamas's attempts to defend themselves represent a provocation justifying more flaming death from the sky, which, by the way, you all paid for. Just a little reminder that you share in the guilt for these war crimes here. Okay, Israel is lobbying the U.S. government to soften the tone of the quartet report on those settlements, and basically trying to head off yet another confrontation in the United Nations Security Council, which Israel will order the U.S. to veto. But every time Israel orders the U.S. to veto a UN Security Council resolution on Israel, and the U.S. does so, as they do without fail, it makes it look worse for Israel and the United States. And they'd like to weasel around yet another confrontation. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're getting in on the program here. Now, the U.S. is starting to really throw its diplomatic weight around. And I get that this is less about self-assuredness and more about insecurity, that this plan to bring the world back to Bretton Woods, to get all of the countries using the U.S. dollar for cross-border trade and banking, to have all the world's natural resources bought and sold only for the dollar, it's in serious trouble. Because if you remember back in 2003 when General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on this plan, that the U.S. was going to invade or regime change all the Middle Eastern oil nations to make sure they always traded their natural resources for the dollar, and then Venezuela got added to the list. This was all supposed to have been over and done with in 2008 with the conquest and overthrow of Iran. Obviously, it is somewhat later. It's 2016. They're mired in Afghanistan. They're mired in Iraq. They're mired in Libya. They're mired in Yemen. They've been stuck in Syria for going on 5 years now, trying to get Assad out. It just isn't working. So, adding fuel to the fire, the U.S. ambassador to Hungary went up there and basically declared to Hungary's government, you have to help us overthrow Assad in Syria, you have to let in all these refugees coming from the Middle East, and you have to help us fight Russia or else. We're starting to hear a lot of or else in American diplomatic speak, whether it's this gentleman in Hungary or John Kerry down there to Assad. They're getting to the or else phase. And that's a prelude to actual war. Now, let us not be mistaken. We're already well into World War III. Nobody wants to admit it. Nobody wants to admit we're living in a wartime economy. But at some point, there's going to be a giant event that will weld all these little battles together, and somebody will say, oh, my goodness, it's a world war. And things will really start cooking at that point. I'm convinced 50 years from now, textbooks will look back at 2016 and say that, yes, the world war was already underway at this point. Now, another article coming out of Boiling Frog Post, Sibel Edmonds' website, what's cooking over in Bosnia? Because now the CIA director is visiting all over the Balkans. And I think it's obvious what's going on. The United States government needs a major war against a great state, Russia and China. And the reason for the war is purely economic. As the dollar is seen as less and less reliable, countries are turning away from using it. Bretton Woods is dead. Nixon killed it when he ended gold convertibility. Then they tried to prop it up with the petrodollar deal. That's now falling apart. More and more countries are doing cross-border trade and banking in currencies other than the dollar. And the two strongest challengers to the global hegemony of the U.S. dollar are the Russian ruble and the Chinese yuan, especially now that the Chinese yuan has a gold backing behind it, with rumors that Russia is not far behind. Because if the world drops using the U.S. dollar for international trade and banking, the U.S. economy has got nothing else left to prop itself up. Our manufacturing has declined in quality and quantity, and nobody wants our GMO agriculture. They're really in a corner. Now, over in Great Britain, you've probably been hearing about how all these members of the Labour Party are being thrown out of the party for minor criticisms of Israel. And in some cases, they're thrown out without even being told what it is they supposedly have done. Article coming out of Global Research is saying that basically this is all out McCarthyism against outspoken critics of Israel within the Labour Party's ranks. It's a purge is what it is. Because more and more people are willing to stand up and say, Israel is in the wrong. And this is not about their race, their ethnicity, or their religion. It's about the behavior of Israel's government. And it is deserving of criticism. And Israel's defenders are out there saying, oh, you're just criticizing Israel because you hate the Jewish people. That's nonsense. That's like saying the only reason anybody criticizes the Nazis is we hate the German people. It's absurd. And Israel keeps working with this same propaganda piece, only it doesn't function anymore because we understand that's what they're doing. And so now they're trying to shut down freedom of speech here in the U.S., especially on college campuses. You heard that Hillary promised if she's president, she will shut down pro-Palestinian groups on college campuses. First Amendment be gosh darn. Israel's not going to give up their covert control of the world easily. Now then, down in Venezuela, I feel sorry for the Venezuelan people. They have been a target of covert U.S. overthrow going all the way back to when Hugo Chavez was still in office. There's growing suspicion that Hugo Chavez was assassinated. And the current President Maduro is clinging on to power with his fingernails. Their economy's in a shambles. They've been targeted for economic warfare by the United States because Hugo Chavez dared to sell Venezuela's oil for currencies other than the dollar. You're not allowed to do that. How dare you sell your oil to China for Chinese yuan? You're supposed to come through us for the money. So we get a percentage, like the mafia does. Get a piece of the action. Venezuela sells oil to China. U.S. gets a piece of the action. We get a piece of the action of all things. It's the way they've been coming across here. Now, only a few days after 1.8 million Venezuelans signed a petition to kick Maduro out, his primary opposition leader has been assassinated. German Mavere, leader of the UNT party, was shot in the head. They didn't even try and cover it up or blame it on somebody in a bookstore. They just shot him dead. So Venezuela is descending. It's already there, into chaos here. Now, some people love chaos. They love war and they love bloodshed. Now, there's an old saying that war is good for business. That's not entirely accurate. War is good for the war business. It's bad for everybody else. But the people who are in the war business don't care. They just want what they want. And according to this article in Blacklisted News, U.S. defense giants are expecting $50 billion worth of aircraft sales to Israel and the Arab states, most of which will be paid for out of foreign aid from the United States, meaning your tax dollars. You see how it works? The Congress sends a bunch of money to Israel. Israel buys the weapons from U.S. companies. Not really on a business-like footing. And I agree with Donald Trump. If we're going to be sending weapons to Israel, Israel should be paying for them out of their own pocket, not just out of money grabbed from the American taxpayer. Israel doesn't need our financial support. They've got one of the highest standards of living in the world. We need that money here at home. Now, these companies, these defense giants, are out there making these statements because it's going to make their stock look more attractive in a very tricky market environment. But they may be over-optimistic because since Russia put some of their latest weapons on display in Syria, more and more international customers are turning away from the American manufacturers, and they're buying weapons from Russia because they get better quality, more effective weapons at a lower cost, because they're not built with all the junk add-ons that are used to boost the cost per unit under a cost-plus contract. And with the advent of that S-500 missile, a lot of people are going to want that one. The U.S. doesn't have anything approaching it. Now, turning to the economy, Puerto Rico has now officially defaulted on its bonds. The problem is the U.S. government is the guarantor of those bonds, meaning the bankers who loaned all that money to Puerto Rico are now turning to Washington, D.C. and say, you are on the hook to pay for all of this. Which means the U.S. government is going to turn to you, the taxpayer, and say, you are on the hook. We must keep the bankers happy. Banks are much more important than people in the United States of America. So we're going to have to take more tax money away from you. We can't give you anything back for it. And I don't know about you, but the government taking your money and giving you nothing back for it, that sounds like slavery to me. Or to put it another way, government is the most expensive thing you will ever be forced to buy. Americans are spending more on government than they spend on their housing, food, and clothing put together. Are you getting value for your money? If you look at the deteriorated roads, the rusty rail system, the crumbling infrastructure, leaking radioactive reactors and waste disposal sites all across the country, we're not getting value for money. I think what is needed is a lemon law. for the U.S. government, where we take our old, bloated, inefficient, costly government, we take it over to the junkyard, we put it in the little crushing machine, and we turn it into a painted steel coffee table, and then each American gets a check for $25,000 to buy a new, smaller, more efficient government. I think we're time for that, I think, right now has come. But I feel bad for Puerto Rico, but if you understand the predatory nature of the banking system, once you are in their debt, they never, ever let you out. They know that ink and paper stuff is totally worthless. What is of value is the debt and the control over a nation and its people that it brings. Rule by bank interest. And it's no more a legitimate form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And it only works as long as you allow yourself to be brainwashed into thinking this is how the world is supposed to be. Now, the acceleration of de-dollarization around the globe is about to take off. Russia is about to launch a ruble-denominated oil trading platform. Jim Sinclair is saying this is going to be the economic nuke that is really going to shake up the global economy. And it's why the U.S. and its allies continue to say, bad Putin, Russian aggression, Russian aggression. That's why we've got to send all those weapons to the Russian border, and we've got to sneer at them because Russia's being aggressive. Really? Do you see Russian troops on the northern side of the Canadian border or the southern side of the Mexican border? Do you see Russian flotillas tooling around the Gulf of Mexico playing with their weapons? We all know who the aggressor here is. Now, ever since the release of the Panama Papers, a lot of people are starting to look at the very nature of tax havens and why they exist. And looking at the volume, the actual volume of these tax havens being used by the world's elite to hide their wealth and duck taxation, which means the tax burden falls on you who are too poor to have a tax haven, we come to the conclusion, and this is in Russia Today, the tax havens are distorting the global economy because it's taking way too much liquidity out of society and just hiding it away. And if anybody should be taking the lead in shutting down tax havens, it should be Great Britain, because 1/3 of all global tax havens are on British-administered territories around the world. I don't think we'll see that happen. The rich don't think the laws ought to apply to them. Taxes, that's just for you little people to pay. We're the elites. The laws and taxes don't apply to us. You serfs and slaves, so forth, so on. Now, over in Greece, things are getting very, very tense under the cry of austerity to try and get a third bailout, which isn't actually a bailout, it's just another loan. The Greek Parliament has approved cuts to pension and multiple new taxes on the Greek people. The message is continuing to go on out that you must make do with less so we can give the bankers more. You can make do with less so we can give the bankers more. You must make do with less so we can give the bankers more. Now, needless to say, protests have erupted in Athens. The Greek police are using tear gas. And we can understand one reason why the Greek people are very upset about this. We know that half of the accumulated Greek debt was created by a fraudulent currency swap deal carried out by former Greek President Papandreou and Goldman Sachs to try and conceal Greece's debt as it became part of the European Union. But in the process, it doubled Greece's real debt. Goldman Sachs made a fortune off the deal, as they always do. And so half of that debt was arrived at by fraud. Now, normally under law, fraud negates consent. If you find demonstrated fraud, the contract is broken. It's null and void. However, the money junkies have a different set of rules, and we have heard all of these top financial leaders, like Christine Lagarde over at the International Monetary Fund, have come on out and said flat out, we don't care if the debt was created through fraud. You, the people, owe that debt to us. Period. End of discussion. Now, we know that's not actually true. There is a principle in international law called odious debt. And believe it or not, The IMF and the Federal Reserve both have law teams at work right now trying to find ways where the principle of odious debt can be disposed of. So they can come on in and hold the people of a country responsible for debts that never should have been incurred by their government in the first place. The goal of the money junkies isn't to own all the money, because they know it's just worthless ink and paper and numbers in a computer. They want to own the hard assets of the planet. Call it neo-feudalism. They want to go back to a world where a tiny number of people own everything and everybody else is reduced to a new form of serfdom, where we just spend our lives working for the nobility's leave to live on their property and work in their factories and work in their fields. Now, go back and read your history. Feudalism wasn't very good for the people. It was great for the nobility, terrible for the people. That's the world, the New World Order money junkies are trying to drag us back to. Down in Brazil, the real has plummeted with the stocks. Apparently, the attempt to impeach their president has hit a roadblock and has ruined confidence in the system down there as well. Now, here in the United States, as austerity starts to be the watchword here, we're seeing all these people talking about, it's all those entitlements. Those entitlements are really just, the assistance to hungry and homeless people. I mean, they're just hungry and homeless. They're of no use. Why are we spending all that money? Have you ever noticed these entitlement reformers never even mention the high cost of military spending or those tax shelters? This is called blaming the victims. They don't want to talk about the real problem. They want to trick you into thinking that it's people who are in Social Security or pensions or the rest. They're the problem. We just need to shut them down. Like I said, we're actually in a wartime economy. They don't want you to realize it. But when you start stealing from your most vulnerable segment of society in order to fund the war effort, that's a war economy. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And earlier I was talking about how the corporate media is going on and on about the bathroom bill and, I'm not sure what bathroom I should use. And, of course, Bill Clinton's already on his way over to Target saying, I can use the women's room. I can go on in there. I'm a lesbian trapped in a man's body. I can go in there. So I said, there's got to be something going on that they don't want to report on the TV network news, and it has just surfaced. And it's in relation to Hillary Clinton's email server scandal. Now, let me give you a little bit of backstory on here. And it has to do with Brian Pagliano, who was the gentleman who originally set up Hillary's private email server in her private residence outside government control and surveillance. Hillary said it was for her convenience, so she only had to carry one device. Then she was photographed with several devices, and everybody said, you can have a single iPhone that does accept multiple email accounts. So that was nonsense. Now, Brian is cooperating with the investigation. He has to. He's been granted immunity. And as part of the immunity deal, he has to testify truthfully and surrender all supporting documents. So the investigators went on over to the State Department and said, we would like a copy of all of Brian Pagliano's emails from the time he served as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton's senior information technology staffer while she was Secretary of State. The State Department has just announced, we can't find any of his emails. They're just gone. We have no idea. And the dog ate the backup tapes. Really, it's a mystery to us. Now remember what Richard Nixon said? It isn't the crime that gets you, it's the cover-up. And so this is an important story to pick up. It's posted to WhatReallyHappened.com. I just put it out on LinkedIn and Facebook. This is an important story to spread around because it's further reinforcing the very obvious conclusion that Hillary Clinton is covering up something. I think she was selling U.S. secrets to other countries. But it doesn't really matter. She's dealing with a tremendous negative image right now, which all of her election fraud so far is barely keeping up with. For the State Department to come on out and say, nope, there's no emails, that's ridiculous. They're required by law to have a backup system. Somebody has deleted, Orwellized, those files because there are things in there that would absolutely nail Hillary Clinton. It's fully on display. Cover up. We should get a bright, flashing red neon sign, glue it to Hillary Clinton's forehead that says, cover up, cover up, cover up, cover up, cover up. It's pretty obvious. All right, getting on back to the economy. As you know, we have been waging a little bit of an information war on the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Now, these deals are being negotiated in secrecy that would be more appropriate to developing a nuclear arsenal. The public has absolutely been forbidden from understanding what these various governments are demanding. But fortunately, some of the information is leaking out. Greenpeace has leaked out over 200 pages of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and it is an absolute raw deal. It allows corporations to evade sovereign national laws. In fact, corporations that are selling dangerous products would be given the ability to ignore laws against their products because it's restraint of trade, and even sue the governments that tried to control their products, such as bad vaccines, GMO food, defective products. It's an attempt to force corporate government on us all above the sovereign nation state. We got to take a break for station identification. Back with Hour 2 after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is back at the controls, and this is, of course, hour number 2. Now, we were talking about the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Significant portions of that have been leaked out, and it is a giveaway to corporate interests. One of the provisions, just to give you an idea, would require European countries to allow the importation and sale of GMO food, or the U.S. would simply block the importation of European-made cars. So it's coercive. It's not free trade at all. It's attempting to use this agreement to bring the world back to as it was in the 1950s. Now, the ultimate purpose for GMO food is not better quality food. It's monopolistic control of global food production. That's the real goal, to remove the choice of what seeds you will plant, because all seeds that survive will be the intellectual property of Monsanto. Not surprisingly, the revelation of the leaks from Greenpeace have triggered a massive backlash in Europe. France has already come out and said they will not sign this thing at all. And now the German government is saying they're not going to back it, even though Angela Merkel is fully on board. But then Angela Merkel didn't see anything from the New World Order that she was not instantly in love with, whether it's mass refugee, forced migration, global economics, staying in the European Union. But these trade deals are a giveaway to corporate interests. As I was saying before the hour break, if a company is selling a bad product, like a dangerous vaccine, and a country says, we're passing a law to ban this for sale in our country, the corporation, under the terms of these transatlantic, trans-Pacific agreements, that corporation can sue the government for restraining their trade just because the product was unsafe and killing a few people. And they could even sue that government for lost profits. That's what's in there, and that's why they were keeping this thing so secret. Now, there are massive rallies all around the world against this. We have one in a video from Rome. Tens of thousands of Italians came out in Rome, Italy, protesting against TTIP, corporate rule by the United States, protesting against GMO because they know how dangerous it is. By the way, we put up a printable list of known product manufacturers in the United States who are customers of Monsanto's GMO technology, and you might be surprised. There are some companies on there whose public image is one of healthy eating, and they aren't. Now, Obama is out there still trying to prop up TTIP by saying that this treaty is necessary in order to protect the mega banks from prosecution. Well, maybe they should be prosecuted. They'd stop doing what they've been doing if some of these clowns went to jail. You had J.P. Morgan admitting to rigging interest rates. You had the LIBOR scandal, gold and price fixing. When the mortgage-backed security fraud imploded back in 2008, Iceland had the right idea. They threw their crooked bankers in jail. They let the banks collapse. Then they wrote off all the debt that had been created through that fraud. And Iceland's doing very, very well, which you don't hear about in the corporate media because they don't want you slaves to get uppity ideas now about economic freedom and independence and opportunity. Here in the United States of America, they solved the problem with bailouts. Now, bailout is government speak for we're going to take $1 trillion away from the American people and we're going to give it to the banks so the banks can then lend that money back to the people at interest. Such a deal. Great for the bankers, not so good for the American people, especially because most of those financial firms simply took that money and wrote themselves amazingly lucrative bonuses for having survived the crisis of their own making. And so here we have Obama out there trying to push the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership with the excuse that we have to protect the banks from prosecution because banks are the most holy edifice we have. We must worship the bankers. People are are unimportant. The banks, we have to always worship the banks here. Now, getting back to the secrecy involved with these trade deals. It is ridiculous, both in Europe and the United States. Nobody's allowed to see the documents. Even the negotiators and members of the government who are involved on the committees that are required to pass muster on this deal are required to sign non-disclosure agreements. They cannot get copies of the document for their own reading. They are allowed into a private room after leaving all of their electronics outside, and they're allowed to look at the pages, but they're not allowed to make copies. Now, in Europe, they're allowed to take a pad of paper and a pen to make notes, but they cannot transcribe verbatim. In the U.S., they're not even allowed to do that. It's just whatever they can look at and memorize. And then if they come out and say something negative, the media says, well, his memory is faulty. Obviously, we don't have a copy to back that up. So this European Parliament member actually made a video of the way he was being treated. A member of the European Parliament was being treated like a prisoner. And he got a video of it, and he put it up on the web. It's gone viral all over the world. The European Parliament has ordered him to take the video down. He is refusing. He's standing his ground. These trade agreements are a sellout of our national sovereignty to corporate rulership and the New World Order. It's part of that plan to crush all the world's economies down to the same low level so they can drop the borders. The other part of it is flooding the United States with illegal immigrants and refugees, and Europe with refugees. They were hoping if they just threw all these different people, multicultural, into a giant blender and hit puree, that we would all just get used to it, sit around the campfire holding hands and singing Kumbaya. Has not worked out that way. Because migration is a filtering process. We're not getting the best representatives of that foreign society. We're getting the dregs. Remember when the U.S. government opened up Cuban immigration? Castro went down to the prisons, took all the prisoners, put them on boats, and said, 90 miles north, get out of here. And it was an epic disaster. And having learned absolutely nothing from that, we have this horrible open borders policy that is flooding our nation with people with known gang ties, fleeing prosecution in their own countries, carrying contagious diseases that not too long ago were considered eradicated in this country. But it's all to try and force this New World Order because they realize the agenda is in trouble. Too many people understand that's what's going on. And so they've hit pedal to the metal on this, and the more they push and the more they rush, the more obvious they become. Good example. The Dutch Parliament, now not too long ago, there was a Dutch referendum regarding allowing Ukraine into the European Union. Now, Ukraine has become a lose-lose proposition for the European people. The strong economies like Britain and Germany are already being sucked dry to prop up the member states of the European Union whose economies have already been destroyed by the money junkies. Ukraine is hideously in debt. The war against the eastern Ukrainian breakaway republics has destroyed much of Ukraine's manufacturing ability and agriculture. They don't really have anything to make any money with. It's like your bank offering to give you a brand new credit card, but it's already maxed out. You can't borrow anything on it, but you're on the hook for the payment. So the people of Europe don't want Ukraine to come on in. They're struggling already. And the Dutch held a referendum that overwhelmingly said no to the Ukraine-EU association. The Dutch Parliament ignored the Dutch people and just passed it. You voters are too stupid to understand the larger issues at stake, like World War III and the New World Order. Therefore, we will make these difficult choices for you, which seems to be an attitude that is a raging epidemic across all of the world's capitals. This idea that democracy has just become unusable because too many people want to have their say. Oh, how arrogant they are. Now, at this point, as you know, we're coming up on the Brexit, and it already looks like the election's going to be rigged based on last week's regional elections in Great Britain. More about that in a bit. But you've got the Brexit, the Frexit, the Drexit, the Grexit, and at this point, nearly half of the voters in all the EU countries say the time has come for a referendum whether to remain in the bloc or not. Now, the New World Order group, and even just those behind the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, desperately want to keep the EU together. Because if it does come apart, it's a major setback. TTIP will be dead on arrival. And the way the New World Order was going to operate was they were going to create all of these unions. The European Union, the North American Union, the Trans-Asian Union, well, we can't do much with Australia, we'll just leave them to pick up at the end. And then they would start merging the unions. And there's already talk of finalizing the North American Union and immediately merging it with the EU under corporate rule. And they've hit some major, major impediments, in particular the economic crushing down that has resulted from the European Central Bank and the furor over the refugee crisis, which is out of control. Now, over in Great Britain, David Cameron, who's on the side of the New World Order, is mounting a major fear-mongering campaign against the Brexit. He's actually come on out and said that if Great Britain breaks free of the European Union, it will trigger World War III. He doesn't elaborate on how that's going to come about, but he's saying we have to stay connected to the European Union. Britain is this weak little country. We could never survive on our own. And the scaremongering just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. If Britain leaves the European Union, it'll start World War III. Then an asteroid will strike the Earth and trigger a new ice age. And then we'll be under glaciers if we leave the European Union. Then the dinosaurs will come back to life and eat the survivors left over from the alien invasion that Doctor Who will have failed to stop. I mean, that's how silly it's getting on out there. And as usual, demonizing Russia and Putin. Oh, if Great Britain leaves the EU, Putin is going to invade. Why? What does Great Britain have that's worth the trouble? Let us stipulate that Britain leaves the European Union. It's certainly what the majority of the British people want. And let us say that Russia, for whatever reason, starts invading Europe from the east. I mean, they're not going to hop over Europe just to invade Britain. Let's get real. How long does it take to sign a treaty of alliance? You don't need to be locked into a permanent trade agreement if the issue is a potential military intervention. Dave? Now, David Cameron also went on out and spent taxpayer money putting together this series of commercials that were using veterans from the Second World War to urge staying in the European Union, that we've got to stand firm against the rise of Nazism. They're old guys. And it triggered an immediate backlash from British veterans of more recent wars, saying this is wholly inappropriate. It's actually backfired on him badly. Now, getting back to the elections, last week Britain had some local elections, problems all over the place, but trust us, they were just innocent mistakes. Now, over at Barnet, the council chief has stepped down because of the problems at all their polling stations. And this included voters were being turned away from all 155 polling stations because their names were not on the polling list. The excuse is, oh, we sent the wrong lists. Our bad, innocent mistake. We did nothing wrong. Now, if you try and steal a bottle of beer, you go to jail. If you try and steal an election, you just walk away. That needs to change. I think that a few coats of tar and feathers for these people who make these mistakes might be effective at eliminating the problem before the Brexit vote next month. At this point, the election fraud is so rampant, it's almost like they don't even care if we see it or not. They weren't even trying to hide it during the Scottish independence referendum. They weren't trying to hide it out there in Arizona. The whole system is a fraud. Now, as you know, there was a V-Day march celebrating the end of World War II. And the U.S. and NATO decided they were going to put on a display in Moldova's capital, where they were going to put out all of the latest hardware with American flags. And the public outcry was so severe, they were forced to take this military hardware and basically leave town. Mostly, I think it's everybody understands who the author of the New World War really is. But there's a little bit of cultural hostility, because if you've grown up here in the United States of America and watched all the movies and TV shows produced here, you could understandably be under the impression that the United States pretty much single-handedly won World War II, which would be false, because Russia broke the back of Germany's military during that failed attempt to reach Moscow. And Germany was already in retreat on multiple fronts by the time Roosevelt ginned up that Pearl Harbor thing to get us into the war. We showed up when it was already heading for Germany's defeat, and then act like it was all our doing. And the people of Europe understand that. The people of Europe understand the U.S. was very late getting into that European war. Now, getting on back to the immigration, a lot of people are very angry because they see the forced relocation of these migrants. This is the largest refugee migrant movement since World War II, underway in Europe right now. And the people who are indigenous to the area are very angry because they don't want this coming into their communities. It's been a huge problem with sexual assault, skyrocketing crime, and the government's actions all seem to be about caring more for the refugees than for their own indigenous citizens. Over in Austria, in response to an epidemic of rapes by these refugees coming in, the official recommendation of the Austrian police is that all the blonde-haired women need to dye their hair dark, because that way you'll be less attractive to the rapists. I mean, that's absurd. I thought this blame the rape victim mindset went out of fashion back in the 1990s here. Now, the New World Order is coming out of the shadows. John Kerry is out there making speeches to college graduates, and we posted the video. It's a YouTube video. We posted it to WhatReallyHappened.com, where he's out there at the microphone saying that it's time for American college students to accept the coming borderless world. That's what they're pushing. One globe, one government, one private central bank holding us perpetually in debt slavery until the sun swells up and swallows the planet. So, now, little factoid you need to be looking at. And again, where are the government's priorities? Illegal immigrant households in the United States of America get $5,692 from the U.S. government. That's $1,261 per month more than legal American families. They're bribing these people to come here using your money, and they're shortchanging legal American citizens to do it. Now, my philosophy on this is very simple. As long as there is one homeless American sleeping in alleys and eating out of trash cans, our government has no business sending any of our tax money to a foreign government. As long as there is one American homeless sleeping in alleys and eating out of trash cans, we have no room for illegal Mexican immigrants or Syrian refugees. Period. End of discussion. I am firmly in agreement with Donald Trump. Unless we want to see the United States plunged into the same social chaos that we are seeing today in Europe, it is time to reinforce our borders. And it can be done. Eisenhower shut down the illegal immigrants from Mexico with Operation Wetback, with just 10% of the number of officers currently employed by the ICE. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with law enforcement in the United States of America. As you know, there has been a hideous abuse of the civil forfeiture law system. When it was first started, the idea was to strip known criminals of their ill-gotten gains and return it to the betterment of society. It hasn't worked out that way. It's become a license of local city governments and police departments to literally pillage the population. And Massachusetts has the worst asset forfeiture laws in the nation. If you've got too much money, the cops can just take it. They don't have to find you guilty of a crime. And I'll show you how absurd it's getting. Down in Arkansas, the Court of Appeals last week upheld a civil forfeiture of almost $20,000 taken from a man during a traffic stop, even though he was never charged with a crime and the prosecutors in the case had attempted to dismiss the case. This was over in Texas. Guy just driving along with his girlfriend. They're pulled over by the Arkansas State Police. They were going Arkansas on their way to Texas. During the stop, a drug dog alerted to a computer bag, inside which the cops found $19,894 in cash, which they seized. There were no drugs. Our governments are so broke, they have to loot the people to keep going. And right now, the police officers of this country, under the civil forfeiture laws, are stealing more from the American people, law-abiding American people, people who have done no wrong whatsoever, than all of the muggers, burglars, and robbers put together. The uniformed police are also murdering more innocent Americans than all the mass shooters and terrorists put together. Story coming out of ex-Republic TV. Over in Chicago, police shot a man, put him in the hospital. Then the police went into the room and then came on out and announced that he had confessed to trying to shoot them, justifying the police shooting. And they filed that report only to have the nursing staff in the hospital saying that at the time the patient was sedated and unconscious. Now, there's still a developing situation over there in the Jack Yantis case where this rancher, Jack Yantis, his bull got out, got hit by a car, was behaving wounded and aggressive. Cops asked Yantis to come on over and put the bull down. Yantis shows up, gets out his rifle, is promptly shot by the sheriffs who had called him to come on over and handle the animal. First thing they say is, oh, he was going to try and kill us. He was going to try and shoot us. One of the two cops who shot Jack Yantis is now on the run, has prior record of domestic violence, he's got multiple guns, he's got explosives. He's threatening that if the cops bother him, he will open fire on them. And the police are trying to keep it hushed up to the point where they just arrested the operator of a blog that was trying to get the word out on this hideous abuse. Meanwhile, over at the TSA, the second most hated government agency in the world, Apparently, in just 1 week on just one airline, 7,000 passengers missed their flight because of delays imposed by the Tourism Suppression Agency, who, as a reminder, have yet to actually find a single real terrorist amidst all this groping, fondling, perversion, and stealing of our portable electronic devices. We're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back.
A little early, Mike.
I'm a little early. I'm sorry. I misread the clock. My bad on that one. So, yeah, TSA has been a major, major problem. It's a big money maker for, the security industrial complex, but they don't actually do anything. They've wrecked our tourism here in Hawaii, absolutely wrecked our tourism here in Hawaii, and pretty much everywhere in America that's a tourist economy. Okay, there's the music. Now it's time for the commercial break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as you know, candidate Hillary Clinton has openly stated that if she becomes president, she will end private gun ownership in this country by the law-abiding citizens. Of course, the criminals are always going to have guns. It's easy to build guns. And she's going to get around the Second Amendment not by banning guns, but by passing laws that destroy gun manufacturers and gun stores. So she can stand up there and say, you have a right to keep and bear arms. You can't find any, but you still have the right, even if you can't get the arm. Hillary is the gun grabber's wet dream. And the more the gun grabbers scream about disarming the American people, because let's be honest, they're afraid of us, the more Americans are acquiring firearms. April capped a record-setting year for gun purchases by law-abiding American citizens. People are concerned about their security. Crime is skyrocketing now that we have all these illegal immigrants pouring across the border. Now, common sense has to tell you that if we have a right at all, it is to protect our homes and ourselves. We should be allowed to have the same weapons that Mexican drug criminals have been getting from the U.S. government at taxpayer expense through the Fast and Furious program, which includes assault-style weapons with 30-round magazines. Our government is arming drug criminals who have killed American citizens with those weapons. At the same time, they insist we have no need for those weapons ourselves. We can rely on the police to come on over and take care of the criminals if they don't steal everything in the house and shoot us dead first. So let's talk a little bit about those Alberta wildfires. I just saw a graphic from NASA. It is completely out of control. Completely out of control. And according to Russia Today, experts are saying these fires will burn for months. Now, the people in Fort McMurray, some 19,000 people have already evacuated their homes, and they're not being let back in. Now, here's where the story gets a little bit weird. Back when the fire was still relatively small, Russia offered to send their water bombers to Canada to fight the fire. Now, if you're not really big on firefighting, you may not realize it. Russia has a fleet of absolutely powerful water bombers, aircraft. They're very large. They carry huge amounts of water. They fly out over the ocean, scoop it up, then fly back and drop it on the fire. They are very effective. And the Canadian government basically did not respond to Russia's offer. Could be because nobody wants to let the Russians look good. And, yeah, we'll burn up a town or two. That's a small price to pay. Maybe. There may be something else going on. Because there is a video, and please be appropriately skeptical, but this guy makes a really good point. Remember that big stink in Utah a while back where the Bureau of Land Management was trying to take a ranch, and the ranchers tried to protect themselves and wound up in jail? And it came out that that land, the mineral rights on that land, there's uranium underneath that land, had been sold to a Russian company which had just conveniently made a huge donation to Clinton's charitable foundation. Well, it looks like the same thing may be happening up there in Canada, because the town of Fort McMurray sits over some significant uranium deposits, which are also being sought by this Russian company. And if they were just to go on in to the town and negotiate the mineral rights, well, they're going to be paying a high price because these are people's homes and they're going to want certain environmental protections. But if the entire area is burned to the ground, to a crisp, and the people are gone, then they can buy the land for pennies on the dollar, and they won't have to worry about protecting the homes and houses and the environment. So I don't know that that's what's going on, but the guy in this video makes a very, very compelling case, and it would certainly explain why the Canadian government failed to respond to Russia's very generous offer of these very effective water tanker planes. Now, story coming out of New Nostradamus of the North blogspot, Donald Trump's views on global warming and climate change are to be welcomed. Because basically Donald Trump is not going along with this global warming hoax. In fact, he's actually said it is a hoax. It's just an excuse for the government to intrude more into your life and to tax you for things. By the way, over this last weekend, it snowed in northern Beijing, China, and in the hills above Palm Springs, California. Apparently caused quite a stir for the people on the aerial tramway who weren't expecting that. Now, here's an article coming out of What's Up From That. The former IPCC vice chairman. Now, the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's the UN body which is at the top of this whole global warming hoax. And have just come out with a statement saying that the El Nino current that brings prolonged drought and heat to Malaysia doesn't actually have anything to do with global warming. That's their latest attempt to dodge what's going on and say that humans and humans alone control climate, therefore you must be taxed to save Mother Earth. And Obama is desperate for a carbon tax because he didn't get the expected tax windfall from Obamacare. So now, according to this former IPCC vice chairman, we've got a whole bunch of active volcanoes on the floor of the Pacific Ocean over by New Zealand, belching heat and lava into the ocean, but it's got absolutely no effect on warming. You and your plastic bags are the reason the Earth is getting warmer. Except it isn't getting warmer. Back in March 20th, 2000, the UK Independent predicted snowfalls are a thing of the past. We've had several record-setting winters since then, and winter really lingered long this year, didn't it? They want you to forget that, but it did. Now, when the world started cooling, the carbon Nazis tried to rebrand by saying climate change or climate disruption. But they still have to somehow get back to warming, because the whole idea of taxing carbon is based on human activity, and that carbon dioxide will warm the world, which it hasn't. Carbon dioxide's gone up minimally. It's stimulating increased plant growth all over the globe. But the Earth has actually gotten cooler. So now they're out there trying to sell this idea that global warming makes colder winters. That's the new dodge. And I'll tell you what, if you actually buy into that, take a pan of water, put it on the stove on low heat. When it freezes over, you get back to me. But apparently there was a lawsuit. The Competitive Enterprise Institute sought documents from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy to release the documents that supported Director John C. Holdren's finding that global warming was making winters colder, even though this is disputed by most climate scientists. And it went to court, and the judge just ruled. The White House showed bad faith in how it handled this open records request. This is supposed to be the most transparent administration in U.S. history. And today the federal court ruled that obviously the White House was trying to either withhold or not admit that they didn't exist in the first place, some kind of records justifying the claim that global warming is what's making the colder winters. Now, folks, one more time for those of you who are out with the flu during the last science class. Climate on Earth is controlled primarily by two forces. The energy output of the sun, which fluctuates and is actually headed into a decline right now, a repeat of the Maunder minimum, and the changing shape of the Earth's orbit. And until someone learns how to put a dimmer control on the sun and push the Earth around, nudge it around in its orbit, there isn't anything these fraudsters can do to change the changing climate, no matter how much money and obedience you give them. It is a fraud. It's a total, complete hoax. Oh, we have a caller waiting on the line. I'm sorry. Renee in North Carolina. I wasn't paying attention because nobody was calling the first hour. Renee in North Carolina, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Well, I want to thank you and Claire for being conservatives with a conscience. You know, so many conservatives, the first place they want to cut and have contempt for is the underclass. Oh, not me. The first place, I don't think we ever should have had to pay all this interest that helps absolutely no one, or all the money that's been wasted by the Pentagon going around the world killing people. To me, you cut the interest to the bankers and all the money to the killing machine, and third, if you have, not first, third if you have to cut. So many conservatives that I know are always wanting complain about the social programs, but when you know more about their business, oh, gee, let's see now. Your daughter did make the wisest choice on who to breed with, the little deadbeat, and the government's helping to support them, and paid to fix the hole in your grandchild's heart. Or how about the other ones I know that the government has been taking care of their Down syndrome sister for 50 years? Okay, so the thing is, so many of these people complain about other people, but when you know more about them, they don't mind when the money from taxes is going to them, but they can't stand it when it's going to somebody else. The thing is, what I object to is the interest and the money going to the killing machine. How many people could have been helped, have led low quality of life, or died because interest was being paid to bankers, or we needed another useless weapon? There's a lot of dead people or people that died horrible deaths in poverty because of those expenditures.
Well, I presume that you've read my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, right? Because a lot of that is in there. You're basically dealing with two situations. Ultimately, it all goes back to that model of private central banking. And private central banking does not exist to serve the nation and its people. It serves itself. And it operates because the bankers will come on in and bribe and blackmail the government to hand over currency creation authority to them, which, by the way, the Constitution never authorized the federal government to transfer its money creation authority to a third party. The Federal Reserve is actually unconstitutional. Now, the way the United States was...
Along with the standing army.
Yeah, that's true, the standing army also. Now, when the United States was created, the way the system worked was the U.S. government would coin the money, because it was the metal that was the money, the paper was just a claim check. They would coin the money and they would spend it into circulation to buy what the government needed. The money would then flow through commerce without accruing any interest, and then was taxed back by the same amount at the end of the cycle to balance the books. And it's a wonderful system. It allowed the young United States to become rapidly very, very prosperous. But you've got these private central bankers who've been playing this same scam on the world for 300 years now, and they came on in and they tried to impose it on the United States with the first Bank of the United States. And when they almost wrecked the place, Congress refused to renew their charter, at which point they ginned up the War of 1812 to force us back into their system. Now, private central banks create and issue currency, but always at a loan at interest, and that is the debt enslavement trap. Because the instant that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, more money is owed to that private central bank than actually exists. It doesn't matter how hard you work or how much you sacrifice, you can never get off that debt hook. That's the trap. And these bankers understand the pieces of ink and paper aren't worth anything. What is of value is the awareness of debt that is used to control nations and people. And they've been doing this for 300 years. And again, if you read that article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, you will see any nation that tries to break free from this scam is instantly made war on. That was the real reason for World War II. When the Nazis came to power in Germany, Germany was suffering under huge inflation, the Weimar Republic, and the first thing they did was shut down the private central bank imposed on them by the Treaty of Versailles from World War I, and they issued a government-issued value-based currency, and Germany's economy took off. It was called the German miracle. Hitler was Time magazine's Man of the Year in 1937 because of the amazing transformation. And that, of course, was a problem because all the other nations on earth were starting to say, let's do what they're doing. Let's get rid of the privately owned central bank. Let's have a government-issued value-based currency. Things will be better for the people. And that was the reason we started seeing like the boycott, the global boycott against Germany to try and destroy their economy because it was giving the slaves in other countries bad ideas. Same thing down in Libya. Gaddafi was everybody's friend. He was greening up Libya, amazing infrastructure works. Then he shuts down the privately owned central bank. He sets up a state central bank who is there to manage the public currency as a public utility. And he creates a new value-based currency, the gold dinar. And then he tells everybody you can buy Libya's oil, but only for the gold dinar. That's why he had to be invaded and covertly killed. Same thing with
Yeah, the story of Libya that people don't know is incredible, and how good those people had it, and how good that man actually was about taking care of his people. And so it's just criminal what we went into and do that country. But you know,
it's definitely war crimes.
Bankers couldn't get away with it unless our own government employees allowed them to do it. They didn't have to make that deal with the devil. They made a choice to make a deal with the devil, and then they don't get out of the deal with the devil, even if they say they were tricked. How long does this have to go on?
Until enough people until enough people know about it and stand up and say, this is a fraud, you guys are lying to us, and we're just not going to listen to you any longer. And at that point, when you have the majority of the American people simply refusing to listen to anything the government says, the government is going to collapse the way the former Soviet Union did.
Well, can't come soon enough.
I agree with you on that one here. All right, thank you very much for the phone call, Renee. We're going to switch over to Obie in Colorado. Obie, thank you for waiting patiently. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I just wanted to tell you that here where I live in Pagosa Springs, Colorado, it's a small little town, they keep sending people from the government in to talk in these churches about the global warming mythology.
Yes.
And I've actually gotten up and walked out of one church because they started talking about that. And I said, you know, as I left, global warming is a myth, and this is politics. This is not spirituality.
It very much is, but ever since George Bush's faith-based initiatives, churches have been allowed, even encouraged, to blur the line between teaching religion and operating as propagandists for the government. And there's still a segment of the population that will believe what somebody in a white robe tells them, or a white laboratory coat, without question. But again, for those people living in these areas that got hit by these hard winters, they understand this has just been a load of nonsense. It was all about justifying carbon taxes, buying and selling carbon credits. You need to remember, Al Gore set up his carbon trading scheme with the help of Ken Lay from Enron. Their plan was to do to planet Earth with carbon dioxide what Enron had done to California with electricity. Loot and plunder. Thank you for the call, Obie. We're going to let you go for a commercial break. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're getting an update about that revelation from the State Department that Brian Pagliano's emails cannot be found anywhere on the State Department email system. And the update is that Brian Pagliano's email files are the only ones missing. They're not even trying to say we had a hard drive fail and lost everything. Somebody went through and selectively deleted this guy's emails. Now, he's cooperating in the investigation. He's got an immunity deal. He can't invoke the Fifth Amendment. And so at this point, we have clear indications of a cover-up for those who weren't already convinced of that before. So you've got Obama covering for Hillary. You've got State Department covering for Hillary. Is it just politics as usual, or is there something darker? And I want to remind you, there are two grades of secrets in politics. There are the little secrets that are fodder for the campaign trail, such as Ted Cruz's mistresses or his citizenship issue. Then there are the great secrets, secrets so horrible that if the public learned of them, it would instantly delegitimize the entire government. The truth behind the Kennedy assassinations, the truth behind 9/11, the truth that the U.S. knew all along Iraq did not have nuclear weapons, and so forth and so on, and the truth behind 9/11. And if I am correct, if Hillary Clinton was repeating the 1996 Chinagate scandal, selling secrets to foreign governments, using that weak email server to deliver, and her charitable foundation to collect and launder the profits, that is a scandal. A serving Secretary of State betraying the country, committing treason, that could bring the entire government down. And that means that even Hillary Clinton's worst enemies are going to be trying to protect that secret because it's their job on the line. 40% of the money that is poured into the Clinton Charitable Foundation, which, by the way, has been declared a slush fund by forensic economic experts, 40% of that money has come from foreign governments, many of whom got special treatment at the State Department, increased access, weapons deals. Larry Klayman had an ironclad RICO lawsuit against the Clinton Foundation. Unfortunately, it was assigned to a Clinton-appointed judge who threw it out without even looking at it. Now, Judicial Watch, for those of you trying to go over, Judicial Watch has been unavailable for most of the morning, saying that there's no DNS entry. They may have been the victim of hackers. Certainly the hackers have been attacking my website on a pretty much almost hourly basis, as we get closer and closer to the election. But the good news is Judicial Watch is back up, and I celebrated by posting the story about how they have uncovered hundreds of pages of additional Hillary Clinton emails that were not turned over to investigators. There's still stuff being hidden out there. Now, we may never learn what was really going on, but we do know enough to know there's a cover-up, and that's enough to put serious dents into Hillary Clinton's attempt to grab the White House. All right, we're going to take a break for station ID. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, getting on back to ClimateGate, as you know, I have a page devoted to this hoax and fraud, and it links to many documentaries that have been made about what a complete fraud it is, none of which are ever allowed on the air here in the United States of America. There's a new one out called Climate Hustle that's just now in release, and the defenders of the orthodoxy, the protectors of corporate profits, are out there saying, you shouldn't see this movie. Really, if we could find a way to block it, we'd block it, but that's that pesky First Amendment thing, but you shouldn't see it. You should just trust the government and the corporate media to tell you that the earth is warming and it's all your fault. And they're also chorusing over about the new documentary Vaxxed, which is playing in California right now, and you need to go to their website and find out where it's going to be playing near you, and ultimately there's going to be a DVD, and I'm going to buy this thing. And this film, Vaxxed, focuses on the admission by Dr. William Thompson at the CDC, who was one of the authors of the CDC report that claimed there was no link between vaccines and autism, that the report was a complete fraud, that they cherry-picked the data to arrive at a preordained conclusion. And he went public, and this movie focuses on him, and a lot of other scientists have come on out and said there's a real major problem going on here. And then there's the issue of vaccines themselves not performing as advertised. Now, last couple of weeks, 41 students at Harvard University came down with the mumps. Immediately, the corporate media is out there. This is why it's important that you get your mumps vaccine right now. There's another mumps epidemic. The Public Health Department in Cambridge has confirmed every one of those students who came down with the mumps came down with it after getting the vaccine. 4 other campuses in Boston are starting to see cases. Those people all had the mumps vaccine. And already they're trying to make excuses about, well, the vaccine won't work if you've already got too much of the mumps virus inside you. No, the reality is that when you're working with an attenuated pathogen vaccine, the attenuated pathogen can revert to full potency once it's injected. They had that problem with the polio vaccine recently. And, vaccines are a $29 billion a year business in this country. With that kind of money, you can buy the media, you can buy the government. You can get the Tribeca Film Festival to pull Vaxxed from its lineup. You can get the Houston International Film Festival to pull Vaxxed from its lineup. They're not even trying to hide the fact that they need to conceal from you certain unpleasant realities about the world you are living in. I can understand why the Matrix film franchise did so well. I think everybody understands at some level that it's a metaphor for the world we live in, where we look at these little flat screens, we listen to the voices on the car radio, and we think that's reality, and it isn't. Americans are the most lied to people on the face of the earth, far worse than the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. Now, over in Rhode Island, there is a move to restore vaccine choice to parents, and it's gaining momentum, in part because the CDC, which already recommends 69 doses of 16 vaccines by age 18, only last week admitted vaccines only work half the time. But if they make it mandatory, everybody's making money and they go home happy. Now, this raises the question, if the Flint water officials can be arrested for poisoning children with lead, why aren't the vaccine makers being arrested for poisoning children with mercury? Because that's what's in that preservative thimerosal. Now, over the weekend, I had my own adventure with the Orthodox medical establishment. And I'm going to share that story with you. My general preference is to not let anybody in the medical profession touch my body, especially with that Johns Hopkins report that came out saying that the third leading cause of death in America is medical mistakes, ahead of traffic accidents, shootings by the police. Third leading cause of death in America, medical mistakes. But I was dealing with an infection, you don't need to know the gory details, that I was not able to get under control with homeopathic natural cures. So I finally went in, and at the clinic they gave me a prescription for Cipro, because I'd had the same exact condition 4 years ago, and they'd given me Cipro then. 4 years ago, they gave me the name brand. This time I got the generic, and it didn't seem to be working at all. So after wondering what's going on, I started doing a research if there were any infections Cipro-resistant floating around, because it's the fifth most commonly prescribed antibiotic, and obviously there's a lot of opportunity for pathogens to develop immunity. And I went back to the clinic. Actually, the first thing I did is I went back to Long's drugstore, where I'd gotten my prescription filled, and said, would you give me the brand name Cipro in exchange for this? I'll pay the difference. I was told by Long's, no, we don't carry anything but these generics we get from this one company in New Jersey, Dr. Reddy's Laboratories. Oh, okay. So I do a little more digging, and I go back to the clinic and I say, I need a different prescription, and I need it to be from a company other than the one in New Jersey. So they write me another prescription, and they say, you should fill this over at Walmart. They've got a much wider selection, which not only proved out to be true. My entire prescription cost at Walmart for the new medication was $4. What I paid at Long's for the Cipro was closer to $35. So already I'm feeling a lot better about this. And overnight, I'm better. Problem is solved. And I do a little digging, and I find out this Dr. Reddy's Laboratory isn't really a laboratory per se. It's an importing company. It's actually owned by Indian interests, and it imports from major drug manufacturers in India that operate with very little oversight. In fact, in one case, a Cipro generic was accidentally compounded using a chemical from rat poison as a filler to make the pills the right size. 13 people died. These Indian companies routinely fake the records, and because the FDA relies on the records from the manufacturer, these drugs are pouring into American big box drugstores. This Dr. Reddy's lab is something like the second largest in the country. It's gotten so bad, even the government of India has started pulling licenses from Dr. Reddy's Laboratory. What did the U.S. government do? Well, last November, the FDA sent them a strongly worded letter about trying to make sure that their records were correct and proper. And the irony of all this is, back in 2004, the U.S. government passed laws to make it illegal for Americans living near the Canadian border to drive over the border and buy their prescription medications there, where it's a lot cheaper. and the U.S. government used as an excuse that they weren't sure that medications made in Canada were really safe. No, what they were doing was protecting the profits of the American pharmaceutical chains. And here we are, where we have these generic drugs flooding into our society, and even though they occasionally get caught and there's a recall, and by the way, the word recall tells you these medications got out there into the public before somebody said, hey, there's a problem. They're contaminated with something, they don't actually have the correct amount of medication in them, then it's recalled. And the companies make so much money from this scam, they just keep on going. It's a huge scandal. You're never going to see it on TV news because TV networks get huge amounts of money running those glitzy, high-end commercials from the pharmaceutical corporations. They're not going to gore that ox. They're not going to risk that cash flow. They're going to pretend this story just simply doesn't exist. And therein lies a huge problem. Because we're talking about people who are, first of all, not being correctly treated for their illness. They're potentially being harmed, in some cases killed, in the name of increased corporate profitability. We're going to take a phone call. Werner from New Brunswick, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. You just were talking about the vaccines and the questionable safety of some of the vaccines.
Yes.
I remember this was about 50 years ago in Brazil, one small town way back in the jungle. At the local hospital, they were doing their own rabies vaccine, and there had been some dogs in that town, and people that had come in contact with those rabies dogs, they had to be vaccinated with rabies vaccine. And to their horror, they found out the rabies virus was not killed off properly. So 80 people came down with rabies.
Yeah, that's always a big, big problem. If the vaccine or the medication Cipro isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing, the surviving pathogens develop an immunity and they come back even stronger.
Yeah, and when I heard a few years ago that a lot of the medications, vaccines and so are being manufactured like in Southeast Asia, be it India, be it China, and so on. And with
but India is the big problem. I mean, I found articles in Forbes and Bloomberg, even the New York Times, saying that in the quality of these generic medications made in India was absolutely shameful. But again, you're not going to see that on the TV news.
Yeah, they are the watchdogs. But I wanted to talk to the other aspect. Some of the nations that at one time were the United States and the rest was in a war with.
Mm-hmm.
Now our food is being imported there or being processed there, the same way medications and so on. And basically, when I heard about it, I thought, are they crazy? A country can be taken over without firing a shot.
Well, it's a little more fundamental than that. Between Fukushima toxifying the Pacific, the Deepwater Horizon wrecking the Gulf of Mexico, and GMO just generally making unhealthy products, we've literally reached a point where there isn't enough safe and healthy food to feed the human population, and so everybody's taking shortcuts. They're adding more fillers, and the governments are going along with it because the alternative is food riots in the streets.
Well, I don't think there's any problem with food riots in the street with the low population density here in North America. And I cannot fathom, why they had to depend on all this chemical crap, to be used in farming, and now with GMO crops. And I've been following up things. And actually, the farmers that were farmed organically here on the East Coast, they have been sabotaged with the knowledge of the government departments from agriculture to environment by poisoning their ground and killing off their field crops to force them into GMO agenda.
Well, they don't quite do that. The reality is that the GM pollen is carried from a farmer that is, legally using it onto farms that didn't even want it by wind and insects and birds. We had that scandal last year where wheat farmers up in Oregon who were trying to grow natural wheat for shipment to China, which rejects GMO, found out that they had been contaminated with GMO pollen from experimental plots of an unapproved GMO wheat from 3 states away. That's how bad the problem is. And Monsanto's attitude, and the government goes along with them, is, oh, you're using our patented technology without our permission. We're going to take your farm.
And, Michael, there's another problem, and that is conflict of interest of the so-called watchdog organizations.
Very
in the
much
government,
so.
Including the courts, their pension funds, their private investment portfolios, from the judges and government bureaucrats and so on that are supposed to be watching over it. Where are they invested? They're invested in the most profitable corporations, multinational corporations, and one of them is Monsanto and Syngenta and so on.
All right, well, listen, thank you for the information, Werner. We're going to let you go here. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Bob in New Jersey. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Hello, Michael. How are you? Glad to see you're still on the air, and you got over whatever it was.
Yes.
I have been involved in the life science industry since 1982, and I still am. I called on laboratories and clinics from everything from the research to the medicine, diagnostics, production, etc., of vaccines and other chemicals. One of the other drugs. A few years ago, I called on a company in Cranberry, New Jersey, Able. It was an Indian firm that brought in it had over 500 employees, but in the laboratory, which did their quality control, they were all Indians over here on H-1B visas, couldn't speak English, and they'd be sent back to India if they said this drug doesn't pass. So the FDA finally caught them after so many years, and they were distributing a variety of generic drugs across the country. As you can see, 500 people is a pretty big company. And 5 of the 5 owners pleaded, guilty to fraud. That wasn't the end of it, though. I get a lead a few months later. Somebody about 10 miles away is starting up a new generic plant. I walk into the place. Same guy I called on, all Indian, same company. I turned and walked out. I don't want to do anything with these guys. I don't know what's happened to them, but it's just one unending thing. They close up shop, they open up under another name, and they think nothing of it.
Well, that's the part that really angers me. When you're dealing with financial fraud, all that's at stake is people's money. But when you're dealing with drug fraud, you're messing with people's lives and health. And I think about that one story I found where this Cipro generic killed 13 people because somebody had run out of the filler for the machine and they grabbed another chemical off the shelf without realizing it was poisonous.
Yeah. Well, even you can't just blame it all on them. Shearing almost got shut down a number of years ago. They had 498 violations the FDA found out, and they were producing a name brand drug without the active ingredient. So here were people prescribed this drug.
So that's why my Viagra wasn't working.
I could write a book on this.
You ought to. You should.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Like one company, Novartis, buys a $8 million, what they call a automated system for drug storage, and they forgot to measure the floor, that the floor wouldn't hold it. I mean, these are the kind of things we would like see.
We're going to see that one on Great Engineering Disasters, I'm sure of that.
Absolutely.
All right,
Mike.
Bob, thanks a lot for the phone call. Good information. We're going to switch over to Wally in Austin. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I know you make your own silver foil, right?
Yes.
I do too, and I don't know how close we are on this, but I take 3 9-volt batteries in the series, 27 volts for 10 minutes, in water that's filtered, and I've been doing it for years, and have to say I've been well for years, and I drink it.
Yes.
I'll drink probably, and they try to say no, whatever, but I do.
Well, you do have to be careful about maximum exposure issues. It is a metal, and but used in small amounts. I mean, they use nanosilver in the drops they put in a newborn baby's eyes. It's a key component of burn medications. My setup's a little more sophisticated than yours. I have a laboratory power supply and a lab where I use steam distilled water as a source, 0.9999 pure silver anodes and cathodes, and I heat the water to reduce the particle size. I'm still working on a better way to determine my true ppm, because those resistance meters, if you're using hot water, the numbers are distorted. And I'd still like to find a scanning electron microscope to verify the particle size. But yes, Claire and I both use it, and for the most part it keeps us healthy. It's just what hit me, something that was probably brought in with the illegal immigrants, was bad enough where I'm not going to be a Christian Scientist with appendicitis, and I went to the doctor. And again, what's angering me is I had gone to this same clinic 2 years ago, and it was their misdiagnosis of me that put me in the hospital for 10 days. It's like we can't actually find good medical care in this country anymore. According to the World Health Organization, we rank 37th in the world for quality medical care. Most expensive, number one, most expensive, 37th in quality. Thank you for the call, Wally. We're going to let you go. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm already getting a flood of emails from people about near disasters they've had medically. And also a few defenders of the orthodox say, no, the modern medicine would never do this kind of thing. But there's something you just need to keep in mind, and I apologize to those of you who are dedicated workers in the medical establishment who are doing what you do because you want to help people. You're part of a system that has become corrupted by the need for money. And the reason is very simple. Look at how much money is involved in medical care in the United States of America. Like I said before, $29 billion a year on vaccinations alone. What would happen to that entire medical establishment if the American people were all perfectly healthy? It would collapse. The sicker we are, the more money they can make. And remember, money junkies, not doctors, are in control of this process. That goes all the way back to the Nixon administration and the launching of the health maintenance organizations. In the beginning of the transition, where medical decisions about what was best for the patient were taken out of the hands of the doctors and put in the hands of accountants. And here we are today. Now then, they're starting to call Hanford as America's Fukushima. They've got at least one, possibly two, of the giant waste disposal tanks out there in Hanford, Washington are leaking. They're acknowledging that 33 of the Hanford workers are already sick from radiation exposure. The West Coast is more at risk from Hanford than they ever were from Fukushima. Of primary concern is groundwater contamination of the Columbia River, which goes right down the side of Hanford into the city of Portland, Oregon, and from there out to the Pacific West Coast. And it's nasty. Now, over in France, their nuclear giant, Aiea, is dealing with a major scandal after France's nuclear watchdog confirmed there have been irregularities, meaning they're not up to spec, in 400 parts produced in Aieia's reactors since 1965. And around 50 are still in service in France's nuclear power plant fleet. In other words, they're running on potentially damaged fuel rods, which is not a good thing. The composition and quality of those fuel rods is critical. And one of the reasons that Iran wants to get fuel rods for their nuclear power station from Russia is Russia makes the correct fuel rod for their nuclear power station. The U.S. has been trying to force Iran to buy fuel rods produced in the United States, which are of different composition and would actually be dangerous in that reactor. But it's all about the money here. Our reactors are good, theirs are bad. Actually, no. Those Fukushima reactors were all designed by General Electric. Okay, we're going to grab a phone call from Alex in San Antonio. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I was calling because I'd like to ask you a question regarding the price of oil and the price of silver. It always seems that I had a bit of an experience talking to someone who was filling up a gas station, and he was telling me that he noticed that the price of gas, median price of gas, the WTI, West Texas Index, always, for some reason, is around 10% of the value of physical price for silver.
Yes.
So my question was, is there still a correlation between a tenth of an ounce of silver and the U.S. dollar and the petrodollar? Is that like a mathematical, like a correlation?
No, I think we're looking at a causal relationship. I don't think there's a direct link between the two. The amount of gasoline involved in silver production, distribution, and sales is minimal. But I think you tend to see all of these commodities go up and down pretty much the same way. We do know, because of the admission and settlement by J.P. Morgan, that, as we all suspected all along, gold and silver prices have been manipulated and kept artificially low to discourage people from leaving their savings accounts and stock portfolios, and also to make it easier for all these bullion centers like the New York Fed and the Bank of France to replace the other people's gold that they lost playing all kinds of hypothecation games. But we know that it's being rigged. What we really need to do is look at the rigging that's taking place everywhere. We know that low gas prices were the result of rigging to try and harm Russia. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Thank you, Alex. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And in response to Alex's questions, we know that oil prices were being manipulated because of this harebrained, poorly thought-out attempt to use oil prices as a weapon against Russia to limit their ability to come in and intervene on behalf of Syria's government, which the U.S. has been trying to overthrow for 5 years. And like most thinking out of Washington, D.C., they stopped at the first suggestion, said that sounds like a good idea, let's do it, and they did not really think it all the way through for possible harm. Russia's economy is dependent in part on oil and gas exports. That's one of the big problems they're having with Ukraine, that Ukraine will not pay the bill they owe Russia for all the natural gas they've been using. But Russia's economy turned out to be far more resilient than Washington, D.C. was hoping it was going to be, and they suffered some harm but not a tremendous amount. Meanwhile, because oil prices were being crushed down, there was a backflash that harmed oil companies in Canada, United States. The fracking industry was driven into the red. Saudi Arabia had to sell sovereign bonds for the first time in decades. This is a classic case of hoisting on one's own petard. And the answer is, yeah, all these things are being manipulated for one agenda or the other, or somebody's profit potential. Okay, we're going to grab a quick phone call here. Daniel in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I just wanted to alert your listeners to a great documentary that I just saw. Just came onto Netflix, if they have Netflix. And it's called 1971. And I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's about the media of Pennsylvania. A bunch of activists broke into an FBI office and stole thousands of files, and this documentary talks about their experience.
Well, that was the COINTELPRO scandal.
Yes, exactly. And it led to the church committee hearings, and they also talk about the Black Panther coloring book in this documentary. So I thought,
we have a copy of that at the website here. What's really interesting, the reason the church committee had to take action is when all this information became public about what the FBI was really doing, and it stood as a stark contrast to what we see in the movies and the TV shows. Americans realized the FBI wasn't about law enforcement or catching criminals. They were the American version of the Gestapo enforcing the will of the government. And it brought the United States federal government as close to delegitimization as at any previous time in history. So the Church Committee got together and they held hearings and testimony, and they learned about the Black Panther coloring book. They learned about how actress Jean Seberg was driven out of Hollywood because she was supporting the civil rights movement. They learned about all this, how the day the hippies took over Disneyland was staged by the FBI on orders from the Nixon White House to discredit the anti-Vietnam movement. And so the Church Committee wrote their report, and Congress passed a bunch of laws saying the FBI cannot do this anymore, so you can go back to trusting the government. Unfortunately, back in Bill Clinton's administration, Congress repealed all those limitations on the FBI. So they're now allowed to go on out and do these dirty tricks all over again.
Yeah, I've watched a few Netflix documentaries. We actually stopped watching television 5 years ago just because we couldn't handle all the propaganda that you get. And so we've been watching just pretty much Netflix and renting DVDs. And we've noticed lately that Netflix is becoming a little more of a propaganda tool. Remember that movie, the interview with Seth Rogen about North Korea?
Yeah.
That thing came out. It came out on Netflix about 2 weeks after it was released in theaters. I've never heard of that so fast.
Well, anytime you have a large media outlet of any kind, whether it's cable, Netflix, Hulu, immediately it's a target for infiltration. It's part of an expanded Operation Mockingbird by the CIA. They want to be in control of all the large media. What they can't do is control the small media. There's simply too many of us. And that's why we continue to capture the lion's share of online listeners and readers. I mean, I've got more people reading my website than read any big city newspaper in the United States. Our numbers keep going up, and their numbers are going down. A lot of them are in serious financial trouble. Clear Channel is operating billions in the red right now, but they're propped up in order to continue to operate as the Ministry of Propaganda.
Yeah, we've definitely noticed there's more Nazi stuff, and the Nazis are all bad, and Holocaust this and Holocaust that.
Oh, that's a red flag that Israel's going to be doing something nasty, which they've already started. They're bombing Gaza without a real good reason. And anytime Israel goes on out and commits a war crime, the American media obediently reminds us all about Nazis and Hitler, and it's ridiculous. It's funny. A couple of years ago, I wrote a spoof article talking about all the endless movies about Hitler and how they're running out of ideas. I mean, they've even done movies about vampire Nazis and zombie Nazis. And so I said, at this rate, they're going to come out with a movie, Santa Claus versus the Nazis. And I wrote it as a joke. And 1 year later, somebody was actually trying to sell that idea as a real movie, Santa Claus versus the Nazis. Can you believe that? That's how desperate they are. But anytime you see all that Nazi stuff coming on the media, it tells you that Israel's about to do something really icky, and they want to be able to say, oh, we did it because of the Holocaust. Forgetting, of course, that most of us and most of the Israelis weren't even alive when whatever it is that was supposed to have happened.
Exactly. All right. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Thank you very much for the phone call. Now, getting on back to nuclear disasters. Back in the years right after World War II, the U.S. government was out there developing its big stick, the nuclear weapon. And they did a lot of test detonations in the ocean out here in the South Pacific, including one called Castle Bravo. And Castle Bravo test, the bomb actually had a much larger yield than the physicists had calculated. And it created a huge radioactive cloud that drifted away. And they tried to get warnings out to some ships, but they couldn't really say much of, anything, just, advise weather turning negative, get out of there. And there was a Japanese fishing boat, the Lucky Dragon, that got caught in the radioactivity, and it was only 6 months until some of the crew just started dying from various radiation-induced illnesses. And that was kind of the end of it. The Lucky Dragon was the beginning of Japanese filmmakers' obsession with nuclear radiation and radiation monsters. But it has since come out 10 other ships were caught in that fallout cloud, and their crew members came down with serious illnesses. Finally, after all these years, the Japanese government has released the information they've been keeping hiding, and the fishermen are suing, and I hope that they get, what they deserve, compensation for their medical costs from all these H-bomb tests. Turning to the world of computers, over in the Netherlands, the government has just authorized bulk interception of all innocent citizens' communications. Anything that you type, text, say, whatever. The government is going to be watching it to make sure you're not thinking those double plus ungood thoughts. Now, we have that here in the United States, of course. They like to pretend there are some kind of security safeguards involved, but according to Edward Snowden, that's absolute nonsense. Now, we already proved at this radio show and website, real criminals and real terrorists can create new systems of encryption the NSA cannot break. Over the course of a year, we came up with 6 different systems of encryption. Not one was ever solved. And if I can do it, anybody can do it. I'm not a cryptographic expert. I'm only a moderately decent programmer, and I was able to do it. So that means what the NSA is watching you all for is not terrorists and criminals. They want to watch you to make sure that you're not thinking bad thoughts about the government. They're trying to scare you into remaining silent with your criticisms of the government. And along the way, they're stealing business secrets from Americans for their own financial gain. And according to Edward Snowden, that data center up in Utah is the world's largest collection of online amateur porn because they love to steal copies of naked pictures of your sons and daughters and wives and girlfriends and sisters to amuse themselves with. Now, as I mentioned before, Operation Mockingbird is in control of the major TV networks and the major news chains, and they're trying to basically infiltrate non-traditional media, but they can't control the small people, such as yours truly, because we are too small. So not surprisingly, we are now hearing an announcement that the federal government thinks there ought to be tighter rules on political speech on the Internet because the new media is becoming too influential. Well, let's be honest here. The reason the independent media is becoming influential is because the traditional media and the government have been caught lying so many times. And people want to go where they're going to hear the truth. And so we literally have the federal government, which has been caught in lie after lie after lie, wanting to punish those of us who stood up and said, hey, you're lying about this. You lied about Saddam's nuclear weapons. You lied about the Lusitania not having weapons. You lied about a Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. You lied about torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. And on and on and on. And that First Amendment to the Constitution gives us the right to freedom of speech, not to protect art galleries or exotic dancers, but to give us all, every one of us, the right to criticize government, any government, without fear of retaliation. Now, we know this government wants to get rid of the Constitution, which is kind of self-destructive because the authority of the federal government rests on that Constitution. If there is no Constitution, there's no legitimate government in this land. But I digress. We know that the NSA spying violates the 4th, 5th, 9th, and 10th Amendments. We see Hillary's constant attacks on the 2nd Amendment. And here come the attacks on the First Amendment. Certainly, Israel is behind that as well. They don't want us to have a right to criticize Israel's government. Voltaire once said, to learn who really rules you, find out who you are not allowed to criticize. And so now we have the federal government literally coming on out and saying we're going to throw away the First Amendment because we didn't think you'd actually have the bad taste to use it and point out where the government has messed up or lied. You know, we gave you these rights in the sure sense that you have the better sense not to use them. Well, first of all, you need to understand something. Government does not give us rights. The rights are pre-existing. The Bill of Rights is the government's admission and acknowledgement of the rights. What's really angering about the Common Core educational curriculum is they're teaching the next generation that the federal government gives you rights and is able to take them back at will. That's not in the Constitution either. If the government can take them back at will, they're not rights, they're just privileges given to exceptionally obedient slaves. So we're coming up here toward the end of the show here. And let's talk a little bit about computers. And once again, Windows 10 is out there annoying people. Story out of ZDNet. Apparently it's been discovered that apps downloaded from the Windows Store are able to download adware to a Windows 10 PC. Now this is a head-scratcher, because supposedly apps you get from the Windows Store, first of all, they're supposed to be inspected and validated by Microsoft. Second, apps run in a restricted sandbox environment disconnected from the rest of the computer. And yet they found an app that is able to operate outside the sandbox and downloaded an executable file that multiple virus scanners identified as dangerous. Now, the one thing we know for certain from this story is that the promised increase in safety and security under Windows 10 is a myth. And yet they insist on trying to force us onto it. There are a couple of agendas at work. First of all, Windows 10 is the transition point between buying a software license forever and being forced onto a monthly rental of everything on your computer. Which once that model is in place, there'll be no new software development. They won't need to. They'll be getting the money from you no matter what. Second, much more rigid intellectual property management, to the point where, at least in my case, I don't bother anymore. When I built this desktop machine here, it's got a Blu-ray player, it's got the Blu-ray monitors, got the licensed player, still would not play a Blu-ray because apparently my monitors didn't have a special chip required to make sure that I wasn't copying to a recording device. My solution? Stop buying Blu-rays. Not worth the hassle anymore. And finally, we can be certain that Microsoft has embedded even more spy and surveillance software in Windows 10 than was the case in Windows 8, Windows 7, Windows Vista, Windows XP, Windows Millennium Edition. It's a constantly growing. We know ever since Windows NT that the NSA has had a backdoor into the standard Microsoft encryption protocols, which is why if you've got secrets to hide, write your own encryption system. And if you go to my article on Rivero challenges the NSA, after revealing the encryption challenges, I did include the source code. If you know basic C programming, you can grab these as an example and you can come up with your own encryption. And I advise you to do it because we do have a right to privacy. The government is not supposed to peek into our private affairs unless they have actual evidence we are doing something wrong. They're not allowed to come on in and rummage through the cupboards and the drawers of our homes or our computers just in case there might be something bad there. That was one of the abuses of the British soldiers in the American colonies, which is why that Fourth Amendment is there. And if the government will not respect your right to privacy, you must take responsibility to preserve it. And as I said, it is actually very easy to do. I really have come to the conclusion that the reason they allowed this NSA spy story to get out, and Snowden may have been part of it, is they wanted to scare us all into silence, because the Gestapo did it to the people of Germany under the Nazis. They created this legend of a Gestapo that could see everything, hear everything, smell everything, could virtually read minds to scare the German people into silence regarding what was going on to their country. The German people went along with it, and look what happened to them. And we dare not do that same mistake. If you let the government make you afraid, they win. The reality is they can't possibly be monitoring 330 million Americans or 7.5 billion people around the world 24 hours a day. There's simply too much traffic. I'm sure they're watching selected individuals. They can't be listening to all of you. They don't have the resources to do it. And even if they did, they couldn't possibly correlate anything meaningless out of all that data. We're going to take a break for our last commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our show after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today. And again, back to the issue about computers. If you are a PC owner running Windows 7 or Windows 8, you need to be checking the patches sent out by Microsoft very carefully. A lot of people have just turned off automatic updates. There have been so many mistakes recently. There is one you need to look out for. It's posted on the main page at WhatReallyHappened.com. KB3133977. It's a patch that has come out to retroactively bring what's called the secure boot functionality to Windows 8 and Windows 7. There is a problem. If you are using an Asus motherboard, this patch can brick your machine. Microsoft has already said they have no intention of withdrawing the patch. They're not going to fix the patch. If you've applied the patch and your machine is bricked, Microsoft's official recommendation is you should upgrade to Windows 10. Too much of our entire commerce is based on this idea of forcing people to buy the same thing over and over again every so many years. A new car every 5 years, a new computer every 3 years, a new cell phone every 3 years. In a healthy economy, we can afford that. But this is not a healthy economy. All the money is clustered up there at the top. People want to hang on to their cars. They want to hang on to their computers. And the corporations are behaving like spoiled children. The old adage of the customer is always right has been replaced by you will buy what we tell you to buy when we tell you to buy it. New computer, new car, vaccines, GMO food. We rule the world now. This democracy thing has gone away. Now, for you astronomy buffs, as you know, this morning we had Mercury transit the Sun. Happens roughly 13 times every century. The last time we saw it here in Hawaii was 2006. We were not able to see it directly. We were a little bit clouded in, but I just brushed off the pictures from 2006 for that. And there is, for the second time this year, a claim that scientists are pretty sure they know where this Planet 9 is. Now, back when Pluto was still considered a planet, it was Planet 10. And this has been going on for decades. In fact, when I worked at Table Mountain Observatory, I took part in the 10th planet search. I think they're looking too close to home. I think the indications are that there is the dead core of a star that used to be still is a binary with ours, and it's way, way out there, and it's much more distant and massive than they're thinking. It's going to be almost impossible to detect. But once again, they're out there saying we're on the chase of that extra new undiscovered planet. The race is on to decide who's going to name it. And finally, out of Scotland, this whole Israel hysteria, anti-Semitism has gone really around the bend. Okay? Up in Scotland, there's a guy who had a video of his dog making what looks like the Nazi salute. And he got arrested. I'm sure the dog has no idea what the gesture means. But this idea, they're just trying to drum this back. Nazis, Holocaust, Hitler, because every time Israel does something tacky, that's what Holocaust, Hitler, go away from us. Anyway, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I've got to do Jim Goddard's show up in Vancouver, and then Claire and I have got a bunch of errands followed by her birthday dinner. So until tomorrow, stay informed, stay safe, stay skeptical, and aloha America.